Hello and welcome to The Ruffian with me, Ian Leslie. In this episode, we'll ask whether the price of living with increasingly smart machines is increasingly stupid humans. My guest is Daisy Christodoulou, one of the most brilliant thinkers around on learning, education and technology. Daisy recently wrote a Substack post arguing our use of technology to substitute for cognitive skills has got to the point where human intelligence is in decline, a claim that she supports with evidence. So I asked her to come onto the pod to talk about it. One of the things I admire about Daisy's position is that she acknowledges the trade-offs. She's not suggesting that we abolish or disown the incredibly useful technologies that we've come to rely on. She's simply asking us to acknowledge the costs to our own intelligence. And she asks us to reflect on what the optimal trade-off might be. And she also gives us her view on how schools should adapt to our tech-dominated environment. I hope you enjoy our excellent, somewhat intelligent conversation. Daisy, tell me about your grandmother.
Sure. So my grandmother worked on a market stall in East London, quite a famous market called Petticoat Lane. She worked in a stall there for 50 years. And
Wow.
and when I was a kid, I used to spend quite a bit of time on the stall with her. And she, like many stallholders of that generation, had extremely rapid mental arithmetic. She could, just sort of add up in her head really quickly. She could also, when she was counting money from the market, sort of whiz through it incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's something that got me thinking about the kind of mental skills we have now and in the past.
So she was not university educated, I take it?
No, in fact, the when she was born, she was kind of really one of that era whose education was really interrupted by the Blitz, by the war. So
Oh, right.
she had very, very little kind of not just didn't go to university. She had very little formal education. She was evacuated in the war and then sort of came back and, didn't have much education at all, really, formal education. No.
But like a lot of other people in her in similar positions and of that generation, she was very very smart and very not just in this way, I'm sure, but let's just focus on these like cognitive skills that you had to pick up in certain jobs or to pursue certain leisure activities or somewhere in between. You talk about the betting as well and like how that involved a lot of mental arithmetic.
Yeah, I mean, this so obviously on a market stall you've got to add up to count the takings, whatever, to deal with customers. But the other thing I talked about in this article I wrote was on track betting. In the sort of 1920s, they came up with this quite high tech system, which is the origins of today's tote. It's called the tote. I think the totalizer data, and it was this machine that would kind of calculate the betting pool. And one of the things I talked about in my article too is there were people who sort of claimed they could beat the tote in terms of they could calculate what the tote was going to say, like this machine was going to say before it came up with it. So people with such good mental arithmetic that they could kind of calculate all of that beforehand. So I think, market stalls, on track betting, all of these things demanded kind of really good arithmetic. And another thing that I talk about in this article I've written and which you allude to is music. So I think there was a thing where maybe 75, 80, 100 years ago, if you wanted some kind of musical entertainment, you did have to make it yourself. And so a lot of people who, didn't have much formal education would learn to play the piano, particularly. Because if you didn't have that, then you weren't getting any musical entertainment. And I'm not sure now so many people do have that ability to do that.
So not to draw everything back to one of my pet subjects, but Paul McCartney's father famously was a skilled musician, and there was a piano in McCartney's small family home, working class family, and he picked up the piano from his dad, and that's, pretty well known, but actually sociologically it's really interesting, and I'm sure Jim McCartney wasn't the only dad, to have to be able to play the piano, and there's probably other members of McCartney's family that could play, musical instruments as well, and yeah, that probably wouldn't be true today, at least not like around a similar kind of like social demographic, maybe middle class households, but less and less. So overall, the kind of picture we're drawing or sketching here really is that there were these kind of skills that people had, and we can all think of other examples as well, that technology has gradually kind of encroached upon and made unnecessary, and that adults born later on, 1980s, 1990s, well, they're probably not, most of them aren't going to be as skilled as your grandmother at mental arithmetic. Fewer of them are probably able to play a musical instrument. And so, now these, as you say in your piece, these are the kind of difficult things to measure, but there does seem to be a lot of evidence on a kind of a broader question, which is that there's a kind of decline in IQ.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in a way, the machines they came for our skills first, and now they're coming for our brains. And actually, it's the second one which is even more worrying. Yeah. Do you want to talk a bit about some of the evidence you bring to bear on that second part of the hypothesis?
Yeah, so I'm aware I sort of, I've kicked off with a lot of anecdotes, and we were chatting about Paul McCartney's dad and my grandmother and whatever. So what is the evidence here? So there's two really interesting bits of evidence that I talk about. One is the reversal of the Flynn effect. So the Flynn effect, named after this researcher called James Flynn, who first noticed that IQ scores were rising over time. So IQ tests maybe go back to sort of late 19th century, and he noticed that over time, generations were getting smarter and smarter. They were scoring more and more on their IQ tests, and they had to be kind of renormed every generation because everyone was getting smarter. And that's actually now, there's quite persuasive evidence that that's now reversed. So you've got a reversal of the Flynn effect. So IQ scores are not going up and up and up anymore. They're actually going down. Now
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean that's sorry to interrupt, Daisy. That's just like a decades-long historical trend.
Yeah. So all these things are kind of tricky to dig into, and all this research, caveats, whatever. The most persuasive evidence for the reversal of the Flynn effect, the most solid kind of data we've got on it, is in the Scandinavian countries, because the Scandinavian countries, a lot of them have conscription, and the 18-year-olds who get conscripted do an IQ test at age 18. So that's a really solid, reliable set of data, going back decades. We don't have as robust and I think as reliable data in the UK. We have some that suggests something similar, and Flynn has written about this himself. But the most reliable stuff is in Scandinavia. One of the things that I find really striking about the Scandinavian data is a lot of people want to say, oh, well, is it to do with, it's to do with somehow, it might be to do with demographics, it might be to do with, is it to do with immigration, or is it to do with, people will say, like, who's having more kids, who's having fewer kids. One of the most striking things about the Scandinavian data is they find this decline like within families. So they're literally finding that like the younger siblings in a family are not scoring as highly as like the older siblings. So the fact that it's happening within families is kind of eliminating the possibility that it is to do with any of those demographic kind of ideas. So yeah, that Scandinavian data is really interesting. Interesting stuff in the UK, kind of, as I say, not as robust data sets, but still Flynn himself has analysed historical UK data, and he has concluded, he thinks there is a dip in the IQ scores of teenagers from the 80s onwards. And he himself suggests that a causal factor might be changes in how teenagers spend their leisure time. So that's the reversal of the Flynn effect. And then why is it happening? That brings us to another really interesting piece of research, which is research around the concept of the cognitive offload. And the idea behind the cognitive offload is that, the cognitive offload refers to when you use technology to save you some mental effort. And humans love doing this, and there's nothing wrong with it. So I'm aware from everything I've said so far, you might be thinking I'm going to make a moral judgment that we're just not as smart and not as good as previous generations. But I don't want to say that, because the cognitive offload is how we advance as a species. It's how we advance for civilization. And I think supermarkets are better than market stores.
So give us an example of a cognitive offload, right? I mean, a calculator is the obvious one, right?
The calculator is an obvious one. The classic kind of modern example is GPS, sat-nav. And I think everyone will have some experience of that in their own life, of when GPS came into your life. Oh my God, wasn't it brilliant? That you just didn't get lost as much.
Yes, and definitely for me, because I have no sense of direction. So
the research on the cognitive offload is as follows. It will let you, if you offload stuff to technology, it is great because you will get to achieve your immediate goal better, quicker, more efficiently, more reliably than you would do otherwise. But it will stop you developing your own abilities. Okay, so if you use GPS, there's research on this, if you use GPS to get to your destination, you will get there faster and you will not get lost, and you will get there faster than someone who doesn't use GPS. But you will not develop as strong mental representations of that journey. And you might say, well, okay, who cares? Right? I'm not bothered about that. But as machines are taking over more and more things, and they're able to do more and more things and do them better and better than humans, you're now getting to a world where you're like, well, if they're doing everything better than us, what is there going to be left that we actually do? And are we just going to never be using our minds anymore? That's the kind of potential risk.
And the principle here is that mental skills atrophy.
Yeah.
If the brain doesn't practice something, it just it basically forgets how to do it, or it gets worse and worse.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
so the more of these skills you offload, the less you're practicing those skills, the worse you're going to get.
Exactly.
But I mean, this is, as you say, your argument is more complex than, isn't it terrible? We're throwing away all the old skills, and we're all getting stupid.
Yeah.
It's because you point out that actually, well, you've already pointed it out, but let's explore it a bit more. A lot of these this is in a way the price we pay for having a much nicer, more enjoyable, smoother, and more economically productive society.
Absolutely. So I think the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, I think he says civilization advances to the extent that you can do things without thinking about them. Right?
Yes.
And I don't want to be in here saying, making a sort of moral judgment and saying this is all terrible. Like, the reason, what makes this such a tricky problem is that it isn't all terrible. Actually, if it was all terrible, we'd just say, well, just get rid of technology. We could solve it. It's not that simple, because the technology is brilliant. And actually, the cognitive offload is how we become more prosperous. It's how we become more advanced. I also think it's how we become longer lived. So there's loads of really good things about it. And to go back to that supermarket versus market stall example, I know from having worked on a market stall that there is no way you are providing for the living standards people expect today through market stalls, right? You need supermarkets, and you need logistics, and you need cold chains, and you need barcodes, and you need you need computerized tills, and all of that depends on crunching through calculations way, way, way faster than my grandmother could have managed, right? Just automating the hell out of all of it. And so I don't want to go back to a world where we don't have all of that. Not at all. What I'm saying is that every solution to a problem has the seeds of another problem. So we are making all these amazing technological advances and solutions that give us absolutely incredible advantages. And then they create a new problem, which is that as we automate everything, we're just not getting the practice in a lot of basic skills. And actually, I think that does risk making us stupid.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, we could. Nothing's stopping us from practicing these skills.
Right.
I mean,
right.
You can learn to do mental arithmetic,
mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to. Why are we so passive about this?
So this is where it gets really interesting. And I used to be a teacher, and as someone who's in education, why is it that people learn stuff? And obviously, I think we want to have a little bit of a maybe romantic ideal that people learn stuff because they love learning, and there's a little bit of that. But it's not just all kind of idealistic, romantic love learning. A lot of the time we learn stuff because we have to learn it, or there's a reason to learn it, or we have to learn this because if we don't learn it, we're not going to get a job and we're not going to get any money. Or even in a sort of slightly different way, if you don't learn to play the piano, you're not going to have any entertainment, right?
Yeah.
And the fact is, when you take away some of those incentives and you take away some of that pressure, that reason to learn, people don't learn. They don't. And I think that's, people sometimes don't want to admit this, but it's true. So I think there were a lot of reasons in the past. I talk about a lot of, for all kinds of basic and more advanced skills, there were a lot of aspects of life in the past that basically forced you to learn. And I'm not talking about school here. I'm talking about outside school. There were a lot of things that kind of just forced you to learn. Okay? So even quite basic skills could earn you money and could get you quite a decent job. And also, if you didn't have the basic skills, your life would just be more difficult. So, if you couldn't do basic maths or you couldn't read and write, it would just make your life really hard. Whereas I think we are in a world now where it is much easier to get by without basic skills. And what I think is really interesting is, obviously, I think this has been happening for quite a while now with maths, because you've got pocket calculators and obviously a lot of jobs have got tills and they've got the automation there. But I think what has happened to maths and probably music over the last kind of half century or so is now coming for reading and writing. So I think there's going to be fewer kind of job opportunities for basic literacy. And it's going to be easier to get by in life without basic literacy. So all of the pressure factors for someone to think, you've got to learn to read and write, I think those are waning. And so then potentially, actually, are people going to take it upon themselves to be disciplined, to say, well, it's something I need to do anyway because it is important? Or are they just going to think, well, you know what, it's just not, I just don't need it as much as I did. So I know what you're saying, like we could just learn anyway, but I think that's not what human beings, or a lot of human beings, are like. And there's a term in the literature for this too. We're cognitive misers. We like to save ourselves mental effort. And in lots of ways, that's really sensible. It's really sensible to save yourself mental effort. But in our modern environment, is that going to cause us a lot of problems?
Yeah. We're essentially work shy mentally, and we need very good reasons to put mental effort in.
And
I love the thing that. Go on.
And this is why I make the analogy, and I make the analogy in a lot of my writing at the minute. I think there's loads of analogies in our current kind of technological moment with the moment maybe 150, 200 years ago where physical machines start outstripping humans. So you have this moment in maybe the 1850s, 1860s, where physical machines are just getting stronger and more powerful than humans. And there's even a sort of famous folk song from America about a human and a machine steam drill competing against each other, like who can drill through the mountain faster, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a bit of an analogy there, because we know now that as physical machines basically did just take over from humans, you get the issue. So again, in most ways this is wonderful. It spares human beings from physical toil. But we also know what has that also led to. There's now not the same need to do physical labour. Most people don't really. Some people do spend their spare time doing physical activities. A lot of people don't, and you have a huge problem with obesity. And so, that's one of the reasons people have said we live in an obesogenic society. We live in a society where it's kind of easy to be obese. There's an abundance of food and there's no real need to kind of do very much. Now, you can say, of course, well, there's no real need to do very much, but you still can. And some people do, but a lot of people don't. And I think potentially you could see something happening similar with kind of intellectual fitness, that all of this time we've saved from the machines doing the intellectual work for us, you could say, well, we could spend that time thinking hard and learning complex skills, and maybe some people will, But again, I think a lot of people won't. And the risk is we're in a stupidogenic society where it's just easy to be mentally lazy.
Yeah, so a stupidogenic society is a society where there are forces that conspire to make a lot of people stupid, just as an obesogenic society. In a way, a society where lots of people are obese is, in a way, it's a good problem to have. I mean, not for the people
I would rather live in an obesogenic society than in a society with famine. I'd rather live in a society with technology that's stupidogenic than one with no technology. Absolutely. So all of these things, they're nice problems. They're nice problems to have, but I don't think you get blasé and say they're not problems. They're still problems.
Yeah.
They're just nice problems.
Yeah.
So, I hear some people who are like, oh, it's fine. People can just do exercise. They can just learn things. I'm like, okay, but like, let's be realistic. That's not how life works.
Yeah. I totally agree. And this is why I really like your thinking about it and your approach to it, because the debates like this do tend to polarize into one or two approaches. Either everything's terrible and, technology is destroying everything, and why can't we go back to the old ways? Or what are you talking about? It's we're all getting richer and happier and everything's fine. Just get with the program. It just seems to be that you can do what you're doing, which is to say there are huge benefits of all this technology. We should acknowledge the costs at the same time, right? There are costs and benefits to all these big social changes, and you have to take the costs seriously. You can't just kind of dismiss
and there's
them.
a line I love from I think it's the American economist, I think Thomas Sowell, but it's a bit of an economist catchphrase, which is there are no solutions, only trade-offs.
It's a favourite.
So that's and that's not me trying to be a pessimist. That's not me trying to be negative about everything. It's just saying, every single solution, there will be some kind of sort of cost to it somewhere. Even the most brilliant solution to anything, there'll be something out there that'll be the cost, and that'll be the trade-off. Okay, and that doesn't mean I'm against progress. Doesn't mean I'm a pessimist. Doesn't mean I think you can never improve anything. Like, obviously you can, and actually I think a lot of good way of thinking about a lot of problems in life is to think about them as, you can critique me for this, I'm being a bit too reductive, but to think about them in terms of an optimization curve of thinking, right, well, we gain this and we lose this, and how can we optimize to kind of get the right point where we're managing the trade-offs and we're getting the sweet spot of the benefits for as few costs as possible. But I just think thinking sensibly about it means acknowledging any sort of progress. If you want to be slightly more pessimistic, all change is a form of loss. Any form of progress, there's going to be some kind of trade-off, some kind of loss entailed, and you should just be honest and accept that. It doesn't mean you don't want the progress. It just means being realistic.
Just to extend the obesity analogy a little bit, so in a society where obesity is a problem, it's a problem for society generally because it puts a lot of strain on healthcare services, and it's a problem for many of these individuals who are ill, or who suffer from being obese. Not everybody does, right? And I'm just kind of wondering what the equivalents are here, where it's not like I don't know what the figures are. 30-40% of people in some Western societies are obese. So it's not like everyone's obese, but when you have that kind of number or that proportion of people with a serious problem, then it actually creates all sorts of other social effects. So I'm just trying to think my way through what that in terms of intelligence and stupidity or IQ, what that means.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. So I think on the specific issue of literacy, you've got a lot of people now, and you've written about this too, and I think a lot of people now really focusing on, well, what is it? Are we potentially living in a post-literate society?
Yeah.
Are we living in, if literacy really is kind of on the decline, what does that mean? And what does that mean for democracy? And so you've got a lot of people saying, well, this is, catastrophic for democracy because, in a sense, maybe democracy is reliant on a well-informed, literate public who can engage with kind of complex arguments. Is there a case where if you're not, if literacy is falling, or even if people can read and write, but they're just not choosing to read and write as much, does that affect the kind of arguments and the kind of thinking people do? And obviously,
it certainly seems that way if you look at political discourse.
And the go-to person here is Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. Unbelievably prescient book. I mean, it's astonishing. He wrote it before social media, and all of the things
he was complaining about TV, and we had a conversation on this podcast with James Marriott about it. We kept wanting to say to him, because he's dead now, like, Neil, you have no idea how bad.
And I should say, actually, with James, actually, I said the phrase stupidogenic. James Marriott, you've had it on the podcast, he wrote before me, he wrote an article in the Times, he called it moronogenic. And I just think moronogenic's a bit harsh. It's a little bit mean. I prefer stupidogenic. Right. So I should say that with James. He's come up with, he's got the similar thinking here. I think, Neil Postman, incredibly prescient. And he's kind of developing that Marshall McLuhan line, the medium is the message. And he's saying, if you are engaging, if what you can communicate via video and via speech is just fundamentally different from what you can communicate via text. You can't communicate the same depth and complexity and subtlety and nuances, whatever, of information. And obviously, he had no idea about TikTok. So in a world where lots of people are beginning to be getting their basic information about the world through short form video, is that going to have a difference on what you can communicate and how you can communicate? I think yes.
I think it already is, right?
Exactly. If you want the counter argument, and I've read Postman, I mean, I absolutely love that book and have read it several times. If you want the kind of pushback to the Postman argument, and this is something I haven't written about, but I'd really like to write about, and sort of, planning to. There potentially is a way in which we idealise and romanticise literacy. And actually, there's an extent to which perhaps it's not the peace-loving, democratic force for good that we always think of it as. And the little bit in the Postman book, I've always kind of thought this and thought, this is the weak spot in his argument, is he has this section where he talks about people in the 19th century having these big debates where they would listen to 3-hour-long speeches and they would read the transcript of the 3-hour-long speech the next day in the paper, and he's talking about this, and it's in America in the 19th century with the debates
the Lincoln Douglas debates.
And you're like, well, those guys are arguing about slavery. So now we would consider that's were those people more moral and more principled?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
But
but maybe you could say, but they found their way.
Well, they went.
They didn't, because they had a war. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Fair enough. And also, of course, famously, the rise of literacy in the 16th, 17th centuries.
Right, but this was
led to a lot of killing people.
So I read this. They were doing a Senate in the US. They were doing a Senate hearing on AI a couple of years ago, and Senator Josh Hawley, he said, "Is AI going to be like the printing press, which brought liberty and freedom and democracy to people, or is it going to be like nuclear weapons, which were really dark and put us under the shadow of Armageddon?" And I was like, you can actually make a completely reverse argument on that. You can actually argue that the printing press led to some of the worst great power conflict in history, and that nuclear weapons have so far prevented great power conflict. Right. If you look at the 17th century and you look at we've forgotten it because it's such a long time ago, and we've had we've had the first and second world wars and industrial warfare since then. But if you look at the proportions of people who die in the English Civil War and in the 30 Years' War on the continent, it's just unbelievable. Like, the 30 Years' War is horrific. It is completely horrific, and just because it's a long time ago, and lots happened since then. But like, to what extent can you draw a direct line between the printing press and those? Well, I think there's definitely something there. I mean, things aren't monocausal, I get that. But, there's something there. So, if you want the pushback to postmen, literacy is maybe a darker force than we think. You look at someone like, I don't want to be all trivial and, do Godwin's law, but Goebbels and Hitler were avid readers. They loved their books.
Oh, I mean, I was just reading, I just read a biography of Stalin.
Oh, we loved it.
Huge reader. I was absolutely, He would have loved the rest is history. He was a guy who was like, really loved reading everything.
I know. And I think there's a dark side to autodidacts. I think autodidacts, we kind of romanticize them, people who teach themselves and who go to libraries on their own and whatever. And on the one hand, there's those sort of working class autodidacts who get romanticized, and the flip side of that are people who do their own research,
Yeah.
I did my own research.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I'm not, look, how can I sit? I can't sit and say I think literacy is bad. Obviously, I don't think that. I think that literacy is a more complex social force than we think. I think that, it's obviously there's been things, it's a force for good. If it is in decline, and and I think when I say decline, I think there's two aspects to this. I think there's one of, I genuinely actually think levels of illiteracy could make a comeback. But I also think there's like an allied thing where even people who have the mechanics of reading and writing just choose not to read and write as much. So when I'm talking about a decline of literacy, I guess I'm talking about two things that are linked. If it really is in decline, what does that mean? I think it does mean a very, very different political culture and a very different culture generally. I'm inclined to say, I don't think it's going to be a better one, but I don't want to definitely say that, because I don't want to claim that a literate culture has always been brilliant and sweetness and light, because it obviously hasn't.
Well, yeah. Well, yes, no. I mean, it's the kind of the things that we admire about democracy are and institution building have mainly, involve highly literate people and conversations. I mean, there's a step in this argument which perhaps we haven't kind of brought out enough, but it's a step in Postman's argument where when we're talking about literacy and post-literacy and so on, we're not necessarily just talking about the literal ability to read and write.
Exactly.
We're talking about the habits of thought
Correct.
habits of interaction and analysis that they instill, that literacy instills. And that is what's on the decline. The other way to look at this is that this is just a little bit of regression to the mean. We've just kind of passed a peak of mass literacy and maybe mass human intelligence, analytical intelligence and IQ. And if we drop off from that peak a bit, there's nothing to panic about. The kind of more pessimistic version of that is, but are we ever going to stop sliding down? So I do think we should look at least like how we can slow or stop that slide. And the obvious place to look at is schools, which obviously you are rooted in. And how does it kind of frame your thinking about the debate about schools and education?
So I think if you do want to do something about this, and you do think it's important, all of these things, literacy, being able to have, not letting your brain atrophy. If you think these things are important, then obviously schools have to play a part. And what I think schools should be is kind of like gymnasia for the mind. And what I mean by that, when I talk about that, is obviously, again, to go back to that analogy with physical machines. As physical machines get better, as jobs require less physical effort, people do start to think, well, I wouldn't mind, maybe in my spare time I will spend it doing some physical exercise. And what's really striking is, I think when that first starts to happen in developed countries, maybe in the sort of, you can see trends of it in the 70s or whatever, a lot of people think these people are mad. So jogging, when jogging first starts as a leisure activity, joggers are derided as freaks, a bit faddish. And now everybody's a jogger practically, aren't they? Like, park run Saturday mornings is wildly popular.
Yeah.
And obviously gymnasia have been around for a long time. I get that, they go back to the ancient Greeks. But I think this popularity of, in your spare time, you will do some physical activity that you may not necessarily even, enjoy, and it will require you to have a bit of an effort to get off the couch, but you will do it because you'll feel better at the end of it, and actually it's good for the long term for you to do. That's now a thing that's accepted, and we don't tend to think of that as people being faddish and stupid. It's kind of like that's sensible.
Yeah.
And so I think schools in a sense should be like this, and so that's why I'm a little bit wary about using lots of technology in school. Because I think that's the equivalent of essentially using a taxi to get around the marathon course, or using a forklift truck to lift the weights at the gym. It's like, well, the point of the running is the running. So I'm quite wary of using technology in schools. I'm very wary about kids using LLMs to do their homework. I think we've got to be getting them to be exercising their minds. And it doesn't matter if the technology can do the particular task better than them, because the point of school is for you to develop your skills. So that's what I think schools should be doing. I think there is a unfortunately powerful narrative that is saying, oh, we just got to flood the schools with AI because that's the future.
Yeah.
I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's what we should be doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's just giving up the game, really, isn't it? Just saying, come and take us, machines. We'll lie down in the road for you.
Yeah. And I think there's also a slightly more a nuanced argument, which I still disagree with. And the more nuanced argument is, oh, well, all the stuff the machines can do, let the machines do that. And then we humans will focus on the stuff the machines can't do. Now, that sounds really, really
creativity
like a really clever argument. Yeah. And I fundamentally disagree with that too.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. So the main reason I disagree with that is that what that argument misses is that to do the things the machines can't do, you have to first of all grapple with the things they can do. And my best example analogy for this is chess, right? So when you start out, when a kid starts out learning to play chess, you don't say to them, oh, don't bother learning how the pieces move. Just focus on some really high-level chess problems that the machines can't solve. Of course you don't say that, because you realise that in order to grapple with the really toughest chess problems, you have to start by learning how the pieces move. And the same is true of a lot of intellectual skills. So the same is true of maths. In order to be able to do the really complex maths problems which command a return in the modern economy, maths is hierarchical. You have to start and work your way through really basic stuff that the pocket calculator can do really well and quickly. But you need to have it in your mind. You need to have those habits and routines of thought in your mind, because that's what allows you to then build the next step and the next step and the next step. And the same with reading and writing, and the same way you said about being creative. What is creativity? Creativity depends on large bodies of knowledge that you have stored really well in long-term memory, and then they come and clash together, and you come up with innovative new ideas as they clash. You're not going to get that if you never have any of those basics. So you get a lot of seductive ideas out there. Or we can just outsource all this trivial, boring, basic stuff. We can outsource it to the machines. No, you can't. No, you can't. If you want to have complex skills yourself, like you really want to have them, you're going to have to put in the hard yards. Just as if you want to be able to run a marathon, you can't get a taxi around the course. You're going to have to run the marathon, right? So, yeah, I think we need to have schools where there's not as much technology.
I really am. I often wonder, like, why these arguments these narratives that are so seductive and so persistent in the face of better arguments, in my view, and lots of evidence. Yeah. And I don't know. I just come back to this thing you talked about, that we're cognitive misers. I just think, like, we're brilliant at rationalizing laziness. Any chance we can find to say, don't worry, you don't have to actually have to put any effort in. It's fine. You can just enjoy yourself. We'll come up with all sorts of clever arguments to justify that.
Yeah. Well, this is another reason why, if you want some other reasons to be dubious about literacy, why did we develop language as a species? Language is not a truth-seeking missile. Language is a rationalization missile.
Right.
We use language to rationalize our instincts. And actually, this is one of the reasons. I mean, maths is doing quite well at the minute in terms of a lot of kids are choosing maths. A lot of kids are choosing to study it. It's having a bit of a moment in the sun. Obviously, leads to a lot of lucrative jobs. But, maths and the number system are, they are more precise and probably are a little bit more of a truth-seeking missile than language. They're not perfect either. But if you look at why language evolves, it's not to be precise and tell the truth and get you to the truth. You can hack it a bit to do that, but it's not optimized for that.
You certainly can, but yeah, it's to persuade and get
you're
your
right.
way without having a fight.
Yeah, and when you teach kids a lot and you read a lot of their writing, you realise how young this starts. So one of my favourite examples of this, the company I work for, we set a lot of writing assessments and we have thousands of students take part in them. And we did one recently where we asked, we said, the government want to ban mobile phones ban computer games for children under the age of 14. What do you think about this? Give your opinion. And what was so funny is we gave it to 3-year groups, groups of 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. And it was so funny because all the 13-year-olds said, well, I think you should ban computer games for under 11s. And then the 12-year-old, so the 13-year-old said, I think you should ban computer games for under 12s. But 13-year-olds are very responsible and can use them. And the 12-year-olds all said, I think you should ban them for under 12s. But once you're 12, you're good enough, And the 11-year-olds all said, well, I think you should ban them for under 11s.
Yeah.
So we just we are creatures who rationalise our own instincts for sure. Yeah.
The reason I like one of the reasons I like the gym analogy for what a school should be like is that it acknowledges that you shouldn't always be enjoying yourself or having a nice time. That actually, there's a kind of deep satisfaction that comes from hard work, physical work, and intellectual work, right? But it's not like you always go to the gym going, "Oh my God, this is wonderful! I'm loving every minute of it." Right,
Yeah.
but that you're paying the price because it pays off.
I think this is one of the most fascinating things about modern life, because I think modern life, again, to go back to what we were saying at the start, but there are lots of ways in which modern life is so full of comfort and ease, and I think even ways in just the last 20 or 30 years, the ways in which technology has made life more comfortable and easier are astonishing, right? And as I say, in lots of ways, that's wonderful. Like I'm not a Scrooge, I'm not a Grinch. I don't want to kind of go back. But in a life, I think there is a big question now that if there is a world where things can be so comfortable and so easy, and where also your immediate kind of whims can be so instantly indulged, and there are a lot of companies who are just making money out of instantly indulging your whims. What does that mean? And what I find so fascinating about this, it's a very modern problem, but one of the oldest works of literature kind of has that question at its heart too, and it's Odysseus and the Sirens. And I just keep coming back to the modern world. I just think that Odysseus and the Sirens is just the absolute metaphor for our times. Because what it comes across, and as you just said, this idea everything should be fun, but we know the gym isn't always fun, but then you feel better at the end of it and we realise the hard work. What Odysseus and the Sirens is telling us is that we have first order kind of needs and second order needs. And I think this is where a lot of the aspects of sort of, very basic sort of 101 free market economics does sort of break down a bit, because it's like, well, if you go after your desires, great, but what truly are your desires? And some libertarian economists will say, well, anybody, anyone who just doubts that the person knows what they want is just speaking socialist propaganda or whatever. But I think there is a genuine point that we do have conflicting desires, that we want to eat that pack of chocolate biscuits and we would also quite like to go to the gym and be fit and slim.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So people have conflicting desires, and we are in a world where there are a lot of companies with a lot of data and a lot of algorithms and a lot of very smart people who are, incentivized to get us to pick one set of desires over another. And I think, that's at least worth thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, incentives are being set. So we should see if we can set better ones.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay. Well, I think we should wrap up there. I think we've made everyone more intelligent already. Perhaps we could finish by talking about what you're reading. now you're going to say, oh, I haven't read a book in 5 years. But is there a book that you're reading or that you've read recently that you would like to recommend or just to say that you enjoyed?
Yeah, gosh, what a question.
I know, I should have warned you about that.
Yeah.
Because my mind always goes blank when people ask me that, so it's a bit unfair.
I do still read a lot. I'll tell you one thing that has happened. I'm a literature graduate and I don't read fiction as much.
Right.
The fiction that I read, I tend to reread fiction now. And my sweet tooth over the summer, I love rereading Agatha Christie. So that's my summer sweet tooth fiction reread. I do love that. A book I read recently, non-fiction, which was very provocative, really got me thinking. It was Corelli Barnett. He was a big deal in the 80s. And it was, I'm going to have to find the title. I read this and it did really get me thinking. It had a very good chapter on it, a very interesting chapter on education. The Audit of War. So Corelli Barnett's like a declinist. He's this, person who thought Britain was sort of in long-term decline almost in the late 19th century. And it's this
James
very
Marriott's going to love. He loves a pessimist. We'll have to recommend it. Yeah.
It's very polemical, and in some ways, it was written in I think the late 80s, and in some ways, it's aged very badly. And there's a lot of modern scholarship that's critiqued it, and it's aged badly because it's very pro like West Germany and the West German economic kind of success. And then almost as he wrote it, West Germany kind of turned out they have their own issues too. But it's, it's like a lot of like really compelling books that maybe are flawed. The sort of arguments against them, but it's so sort of, polemical and making this case. And the section on education, he has a whole section on the Butler Act of 1944 and some of the problems with it. It's very, very thought-provoking, So,
wow.
And very controversial at the time, still controversial. As I say, a lot of modern scholarship would say you sort of got it all wrong, but I kind of felt, in this moment where I think people now are quite pessimistic about Britain. And it was kind of interesting reading why people were pessimistic about Britain, I guess 30 years ago.
Exactly. There's something reassuring about that, isn't there?
Yeah. So it's an interesting read. And it's definitely kind of quite readable. And the final chapter or so on education, very, very thought-provoking too.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much, Daisy. That was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, cool.
And I would love to. I hope we can have this conversation in a year's time. We'll see how much stupider people have got in the meantime, including us.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ian.
Cheers.